The council chambers of Apex Prime stretched vast and cold like the void of space itself. Ambassador Daniel Brooks stood at the human delegation podium, with his hands gripped tight on the metal rail. His deputy Lisa Morgan sat behind him with her face carefully neutral, though her eyes showed the same frustration that burned in his chest. They had been here before. They had made these same arguments dozens of times. Nothing ever changed. The holographic display above the center of the chamber showed the burning settlements on New Harmony Colony. Smoke rose from shattered buildings while civilians ran through streets torn apart by Kryn weapons. The images were 3 hours old, but the attack was still happening. Governor Andrew Carter had sent the footage with a simple message asking when help would arrive. Daniel had no answer to give him. Chairwoman Silthara sat on her elevated throne at the far end of the chamber. Her scales caught the light and made her look almost beautiful if you could forget the coldness in her yellow eyes. Around the circular chamber sat representatives from 47 species. The Zethrak delegation lounged in their seats like bored predators. The Voth crystalline forms hummed softly in a way that always made Daniel think they were laughing at him. Daniel pressed the speak button, and his voice echoed through the massive space. The translator implants made his words understandable to every species present, though he doubted they would actually listen. He spoke anyway because 3 million humans on New Harmony needed someone to fight for them, even if that fight was hopeless. He detailed the Kryn attacks which had started 6 weeks ago. 4 human colonies burned now. The death toll climbed past 40,000 civilians. He showed evidence of Kryn military staging areas and supply lines. He presented intercepted communications proving this was a coordinated invasion, not some random raid. He reminded the council that humanity had honored every treaty and paid every assessment. He asked for the defensive support that the council charter promised all member species. The chamber stayed silent when he finished. Daniel looked at the faces around him and saw the same indifference he always saw. These ancient species had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years before humanity crawled out of their single solar system. To them, humans were children. Useful children perhaps, but still children who should be grateful for whatever scraps the adults chose to share. Commander Helen Price appeared on a secondary display. She commanded the small defense fleet trying to protect New Harmony. Her uniform was scorched and blood marked her forehead from some wound she had not bothered to treat. Behind her, Daniel could see crew members rushing between stations while alarms wailed. She gave him a quick nod that said everything. They were losing. They needed help. They needed it now. Silthara finally spoke in that musical voice that made lies sound like poetry. She expressed sympathy for human losses. She noted that territorial disputes between developing species fell outside council jurisdiction. She reminded everyone that the council could not take sides in every conflict or they would never have peace. Her words flowed smooth and meaningless like water over stone. Daniel wanted to scream. He wanted to tear down that podium and throw it at her perfect face. Instead, he kept his voice level and presented the legal framework. Article 7 of the Charter guaranteed mutual defense. Article 12 prohibited military aggression against member colonies. Article 23 required council intervention when evidence showed systematic invasion. He had the law on his side. He had the evidence. He had everything except the one thing that mattered, which was that the council simply did not care. The Zethrak ambassador Krelax spoke next. His rough voice carried across the chamber as he suggested that perhaps humanity had provoked the Kryn somehow. Perhaps human colonies expanded too aggressively. Perhaps humans needed to learn restraint and respect for their neighbors. Other delegates nodded along as if this made perfect sense. Lisa leaned forward and whispered that Admiral Kyle Jensen was trying to reach them on secure channel. Daniel glanced at the military commander who sat in the observer gallery. The admiral's weathered face looked grim even by his standards. Whatever news he carried would not be good. The council moved to other business. They discussed trade regulations that would benefit the Voth. They debated environmental standards that the Zethrak wanted relaxed. They talked about everything except dying humans. Daniel stood at his podium and felt 73 years of human membership. In this council turned to ash in his mouth. Then, they voted on Resolution 7743. Daniel had seen it coming, but the reality still hit like a physical blow. The council required humanity to transfer 30% of their remaining military fleet to support a Zethrak peacekeeping mission in the Outer Reach sector. The vote passed with overwhelming support. 42 species voted yes. 3 abstained. Only humanity and the small Thalron delegation voted. Numbered Admiral Jensen's message finally came through. The Kryn had launched a second wave. New Harmony would fall within 12 hours without reinforcements. The nearest human fleet was 4 days away. The Council fleet that could reach them in 6 hours remained docked at Apex Prime because the Council had voted not to intervene. Daniel looked at Lisa. She looked back at him. They had worked together for 9 years. They had negotiated treaties and solved disputes and honestly believed they were building something important. They had been wrong. This council was not a partnership. It was a hierarchy, and humanity would always be at the bottom no matter what they contributed or sacrificed. He thought about Commander Price fighting a hopeless battle. He thought about Governor Carter watching his people die. He thought about every human who believed the council would protect them. He thought about the 30 ships they were supposed to hand over while their colonies burned. Daniel pressed the speak button again. Silthara looked annoyed at the interruption. The other delegates shifted with impatience. They wanted to move on to more important matters. Daniel did not care what they wanted anymore. He spoke carefully because these words would echo across the galaxy. He cited humanity's contributions to the Council over 7 decades. He listed the technology shared and the wars fought and the disasters relieved. He noted that humanity had asked for nothing except the basic rights promised to all members. He stated that humanity had been denied those rights repeatedly and systematically. Then he delivered the sentence that changed everything. Humanity formally withdrew from the Galactic Council effective immediately. All treaties were void. All obligations ended. All human personnel would evacuate Council space within 90 days. The chamber exploded into chaos. Delegates shouted in a dozen languages. Silthara demanded he retract the statement. Krelax called it illegal and threatened consequences. Other species just stared in shock because no one left the Council. No one had ever left the Council in 12,000 years of history. Daniel gathered his papers. Lisa stood and collected her data tablets. Admiral Jensen rose in the gallery with something like approval on his face. Together they walked toward the exit while the Council chamber burned with outrage behind them. Daniel did not look back. There was nothing behind him worth seeing anymore. Ahead lay uncertainty and danger and probably war. But ahead also lay freedom and dignity, and the chance to build something better than this corrupt ancient system. The door sealed behind them and cut off the angry voices. In the corridor outside, Lisa finally spoke and asked if he was sure. Daniel thought about Helen Price and Andrew Carter and 3 million people waiting for help that would never come from this council, he was sure. The news spread faster than light itself through quantum communication networks that connected every corner of the galaxy. Humanity had withdrawn from the Galactic Council. Species that had never heard of humans suddenly learned their name. Traders in distant markets stopped mid-transaction to watch the broadcasts. Governments convened emergency sessions. The impossible had happened, and no one knew what would come next. President Claire Harrison stood in the Oval Office and watched Earth's cities light up with protests and celebrations in equal measure. Her advisors argued behind her about public opinion and economic consequences and diplomatic fallout. She let them talk while she composed the speech that would define her presidency and possibly humanity's future. The teleprompter waited blank and patient. She would speak from her heart instead. The broadcast reached every human settlement from Earth to the furthest colony on the edge of explored space. Claire looked into the camera and explained why Daniel Brooks had made his choice. She talked about broken promises and unanswered pleas and the 40,000 dead on New Harmony. She described a council that took everything humanity offered and gave nothing back. She declared that humanity would stand alone now with dignity, rather than kneel with shame. Her voice did not waver when she spoke about the hard times ahead. Humans had survived worse. They would survive this too. Captain Ryan Foster received his orders while the Earth Defense Ship Valor orbited the Council Medical Station Sanctuary. 7. He commanded a crew of 200 who had spent 3 years helping to research alien diseases and develop universal vaccines. The work mattered. His chief medical officer, Dr. Sophie Blake, had personally saved the lives of thousands of Thalron patients during the last outbreak. Now they had 72 hours to pack everything and leave. Ryan walked through Sanctuary 7's corridors one last time. Alien colleagues stopped him to ask if the withdrawal was real. Some looked angry. Others seemed confused. A few actually looked sad. He had no answers that would satisfy anyone, including himself. Orders were orders, and humanity was going home. Sophie Blake packed her laboratory with tears running down her face. She had been so close to a breakthrough on Viridian syndrome. The disease killed slowly and painfully and affected 4 different species. Her research showed that human genetic material held the key to a cure. Another 6 months and she could have saved millions of lives. Now someone else would have to finish her work if anyone even bothered to try. Her Thalran assistant Masatel helped her pack samples into cryocontainers. His webbed hands moved carefully around the fragile equipment. He asked if she would come back someday. Sophie wanted to say yes, but she knew better. Whatever came next would not involve humans and aliens working together. That dream had died in the council chambers when Silthara refused to help New Harmony. The council's economic ministers met in emergency session on the financial world of Nexus Prime. Quethix, the Voth administrator, projected confidence to the assembled delegates. Humanity represented barely 3% of galactic economic output. Their withdrawal would cause minor disruptions at most. Markets would adjust within weeks. Other species would fill the gaps humans left behind. Everything would return to normal soon. He ordered the immediate freeze of all human assets in council space. Trade agreements were revoked. Contracts were canceled. Human businesses found themselves locked out of their own accounts. Ships carrying human goods were impounded at customs stations. The message was clear. The council would make humanity regret their arrogance. Admiral Kyle Jensen expected exactly this response. He and Defense Minister Peter Cole had spent the last 6 months quietly preparing Operation Homebound. Every human asset in council space had been carefully cataloged. Backup plans existed for every installation. Evacuation routes had been mapped and rehearsed. When the council made their move, the humans were already 3 steps ahead. Military transports jumped into council space at 200 locations simultaneously. They appeared at human embassies and research stations and military outposts. Marines secured perimeters while civilians packed essential equipment. Anything too large to move was rigged with demolition charges. The council would get nothing useful from abandoned human facilities. Captain Nicole Hayes commanded the freighter Liberty Run, which had hauled cargo between Earth and council worlds for 15 years. She knew every trade route and every customs official and every trick for moving goods quickly. Now she led a convoy of 60 merchant ships racing to extract humans and equipment before the council could seize everything. Her crews worked around the clock loading refugees and supplies while council patrol ships circled like sharks, waiting for an excuse to attack. The first confrontation happened at the mining station on Kepler 7. Council security forces tried to seize 3 human cargo ships. The ships were technically still in human territory, but the council claimed jurisdiction under some obscure treaty clause. Nicole watched the standoff through her long-range sensors. Her finger hovered over the jump drive activation, while she waited to see if this would turn into a shooting war. The human ships powered up weapons. Council forces backed off. No one wanted to fire the first shot in what might become a galactic war. The cargo ships jumped to safety with their holds full of refined metals worth billions of credits. Score 1 for humanity. Not every extraction went smoothly. 3 human ships were seized at Voth stations. 2 diplomats were arrested on questionable charges. A research team on the Outer Rim simply disappeared and no one could say what happened to them. Kyle Jensen cataloged each incident and promised himself there would be a reckoning someday. For now they focused on getting people home alive. The Kryn sensed opportunity like predators smelling blood. They accelerated their invasion of human colonies. Governor Andrew Carter watched enemy ships mass at the edge of his sensor range. New Harmony had maybe 48 hours before the final assault began. His defense coordinator, Major Lucas Grant, worked frantically to prepare what defenses they could manage with the few ships and weapons they had left. The colonists refused to evacuate. These were their homes. They had built these settlements with their own hands. They had buried loved ones in this soil. If the council would not fight for them, then they would fight for themselves. Farmers welded armor plates onto tractors. Miners modified drilling lasers into crude weapons. Teachers and doctors trained on rifles they had never expected to fire. Andrew walked through the main settlement and saw determination on every face. These people would not run. They would not surrender. They would make the Kryn pay for every meter of ground. He felt pride and grief in equal measure because he knew how this would end. Courage could not stop warships. Then Admiral Karen West's fleet dropped out of jump space at the system's edge. 15 heavy cruisers and 30 escort vessels all flying Earth's banner. She had pushed her engines past safety limits to get here 3 days early. Her ships were battered and her crews were exhausted, but they had arrived in time. The Kryn invasion force suddenly faced real opposition. Karen opened a channel to Andrew's command center. Her face filled his screen, looking tired but fierce. She told him to hold on because the cavalry had arrived. Andrew laughed for the first time in weeks. The colonists cheered when they heard Earth had not abandoned them after all. The Kryn attacked anyway. They outnumbered Karen's fleet 2-1. She did not care. Human ships tore into the enemy formation with a ferocity that shocked everyone watching. New weapon systems that had been restricted under Council regulations now unleashed their full power. Kryn ships died in brilliant explosions. The survivors broke formation and retreated in disorder. Lucas Grant watched the battle from the surface. Burning Kryn vessels streaked across the sky like meteors. He had never seen anything so beautiful. The colonists gathered in the streets and squares to witness their salvation. Some cried, others prayed. All of them knew they had just watched humanity announce itself as a power that would not be pushed around anymore. Sophie Blake heard about New Harmony's defense while packing the last of her research. The newsfeed showed Karen West's victory in detail. Ships from dozens of species watched the footage and wondered when humans had become so dangerous. The Council had kept humanity's military restricted and controlled. Free from those restrictions, humans had just demonstrated what they could really do. Nicole Hayes led her convoy back to Earth with 10,000 refugees and enough seized equipment to outfit 3 new research stations. She transmitted her report to Kyle Jensen, who smiled grimly at the numbers. Operation Homebound was succeeding beyond expectations. In 6 weeks, they had extracted 70% of human personnel and 40% of assets. The Council was welcome to keep the rest. Daniel Brooks arrived home to a hero's welcome he did not feel he deserved. Crowds gathered at the spaceport to cheer him. Politicians wanted to shake his hand. Media outlets called him the man who freed humanity. He ignored all of it and went to a quiet office where he could work on the real challenge. Leaving the Council had been the easy part. Building something better would take everything humanity had. 3 months passed and the galaxy began to understand what it had lost. The first cracks appeared in places no one expected. The Viridian syndrome that Dr. Sophie Blake had been researching spread from 4 species to 9. Without human medical personnel, the pandemic accelerated beyond anyone's ability to control it. Hospitals filled past capacity. Entire cities went into quarantine. The death toll climbed into the millions and kept climbing. The Council's chief medical director tried to continue Sophie's work, but the research made no sense without her notes and methodology. Human approaches to xenobiology were different from anything the Council had seen before. Humans looked at problems sideways and found solutions that should not work but did. The director stared at incomplete data and realized they had lost something irreplaceable. He sent a message to Earth asking Sophie to consult remotely. She never replied. The Thalron faced their own crisis on the water world of Thalassos Prime. Their atmospheric processors had been designed by a joint team but only chief engineer. Greg Palmer truly understood how they worked. He had modified the original Council designs with human innovations that tripled efficiency and reduced maintenance costs. The Thalron engineers had the blueprints, but blueprints did not explain why Greg had routed the plasma conduits in seemingly impossible configurations. The first processor failed on a Tuesday morning. 3 million Thalron lived in the dome it supported. Emergency backups kicked in, but those were designed for temporary use only. The Thalron government evacuated the dome and tried desperately to fix the processor. Their best engineers spent 2 weeks attempting repairs. Nothing worked. The processor stayed dead and the backup systems began to fail. 2 more processors collapsed the following month. The Thalron Council President contacted Earth with a formal request for assistance. They offered payment in rare metals and technology. They promised trade agreements and political support. They begged. President Claire Harrison read the message and felt no satisfaction. She authorized Greg Palmer to help if he chose to volunteer. She would not order anyone to save those who had stood by while humans died. Greg read about the Thalron crisis and remembered the 3 years he spent on Thalasos Prime. He had friends there, good people who worked alongside him and invited him to their homes and treated him like family. The Council had betrayed humanity, but the Thalron civilians had done nothing wrong. He packed his tools and caught the next transport heading to Thalron space. The Council could not stop him, because he was not traveling as a government representative, but as a private citizen offering his services. The trade routes that humanity had protected for decades collapsed into chaos. Human patrol ships had kept 17 major shipping lanes secure from pirates and raiders. Captain Ryan Foster had commanded a flotilla that ran regular sweeps through the most dangerous sectors. When he pulled his ships out, the predators moved in immediately. The scree swarms attacked first. These insectoid pirates had been a minor nuisance when human warships hunted them relentlessly. Now they operated freely and their numbers grew. A Voth merchant convoy lost 6 ships to scree raiders. The survivors pleaded for Council military protection. The Council fleet responded 4 days later and found only debris. The scree had stripped the cargo and disappeared into the asteroid fields they used as bases. More convoys died. Insurance rates skyrocketed. Trade between core worlds and outer colonies became prohibitively expensive. Companies that had operated for centuries went bankrupt. The Council's economic output dropped 15% in the first quarter after humanity's withdrawal. Quethix stood before the Economic Council and tried to explain how temporary this disruption would be. No one believed him anymore. Chairwoman Silthera called emergency session after emergency session. Each one descended into arguments that solved nothing. The Zethrak refused to patrol trade routes that primarily benefited Voth merchants. The Voth would not share processor technology to help the Thalron. The crystalline Quarren demanded humans be sanctioned more harshly, while the avian Srel suggested negotiating for their return. Every species had complaints and demands, and none of them would compromise. Senator Patricia Mills watched from the observer gallery where she represented the last official human presence in Council space. Her role was to monitor the liquidation of remaining human assets and protect the few humans who had chosen to stay in Council territory. She filed weekly reports back to Daniel Brooks describing the Council's deterioration in clinical detail. Each report grew more alarming than the last. The session that finally convinced her the Council was doomed came on a humid morning, when tension filled the chamber like a physical presence. The Zethrak ambassador Krelax accused the Voth of hoarding medical supplies during the Viridian Syndrome crisis. Quethix responded by revealing that Zethrak mining operations had been stealing from Voth asteroid claims for years. Other species joined the argument, and suddenly, decades of hidden grievances spilled into the open. Patricia realized that humanity had been holding this broken system together without knowing it. Human diplomats mediated disputes between species that hated each other. Human trade routes forced cooperation between rivals. Human military power maintained a balance that kept any single species from dominating. Remove humans and the careful structure collapsed like a house of cards. She sent an urgent message to President Harrison. The Council was not just weakening. It was actively tearing itself apart. Species that had coexisted for millennia were choosing sides and forming hostile blocs. There would be war soon if something did not change. Claire read the report and felt cold dread. Humanity had escaped a sinking ship, but the drowning passengers might drag them down anyway. The Kryn saw their opportunity and struck. They had tested humanity's defenses and learned respect. Now they turned their attention to easier prey. 4 Council worlds came under simultaneous attack. The Kryn fleet had grown and their tactics improved. They hit hard and fast and overwhelmed local defenses before help could arrive. The Council's military command tried to coordinate a response. Admiral Vexthor of the Zethrak fleet argued for defending Zethrak colonies first. Commander Silix of the Voth demanded protection for Voth worlds. The avian and aquatic species insisted their territories needed equal priority. While they argued, the Kryn conquered 2 planets and began orbital bombardment of a third. Refugees flooded into Council space by the millions. They arrived in overloaded ships and makeshift transports. They brought stories of Kryn brutality and tales of worlds burning. The Council facilities could not handle the influx. Refugee camps sprawled across moons and stations. Disease spread. Food ran short. Violence erupted between desperate groups competing for limited resources. Senator Mills walked through one refugee camp on the outskirts of Apex Prime. She saw families huddled in flimsy shelters. Children cried from hunger. The elderly sat with vacant eyes that had seen too much horror. Council security forces maintained order with weapons drawn. This was what the Great Galactic Council had become in just 3 months. She documented everything and sent the images to Earth. Meanwhile, humanity built while the Council burned. Dr. Sophie Blake worked at the New Geneva Research Institute, which had been established specifically to continue her Viridian Syndrome research. Free from Council regulations and bureaucracy, she made progress at triple the pace she had managed before. She also worked with alien researchers who had quietly left Council space to join her. These scientists came from 6 different species, and they all shared Sophie's frustration with the Council's rigid hierarchy. Her team completed the cure on a Friday afternoon. The breakthrough came from combining human antibody research with Thelron genetic mapping and Srel biochemical analysis. 3 species working together achieved what the Council's entire medical establishment could not. Sophie held the data tablet containing the cure formula and felt tears on her cheeks. This was what cooperation should look like. This was what they could accomplish when politics did not interfere. She transmitted the cure to the Council medical director freely, with no conditions or payment requested. The director could barely form words to thank her. Within weeks, the Viridian Syndrome pandemic began to recede. Millions of lives were saved. The species that had dismissed humanity as primitive children now owed those children their survival. Captain Nicole Hayes turned her merchant convoy into an independent trade network. Without Council regulations restricting where she could fly and what she could carry, her profits doubled immediately. She hired ships from non-Council species who were thrilled to access routes previously controlled by Council monopolies. Minor species that had been exploited for generations suddenly found themselves with leverage and fair prices. Her network grew rapidly. Dozens of ships became hundreds. She established trade stations in unclaimed space where merchants from any species could do business without Council interference. The stations operated on simple rules: no violence, no cheating. Everyone paid the same fees regardless of species or fleet size. Revolutionary concepts in a galaxy where the Council granted privileges based on political connections. Governor Andrew Carter oversaw the reconstruction of New Harmony and the other colonies that had survived the Kryn attacks. The Council had written off these settlements as lost causes. Carter proved them wrong. Human engineering and determination rebuilt what had been destroyed. The new settlements were stronger than before, with better defenses and more efficient infrastructure. Other species sent observers to study human construction techniques and left impressed despite themselves. Admiral Karen West revealed the new generation of human warships at a military demonstration that was broadcast across the galaxy. The Earth Defense Ship Defender cut through space with grace and power that made traditional Council vessels look like antiques. Her weapon systems incorporated human innovations that had been banned under Council regulations. Her shields used principles that Council scientists insisted were impossible. She represented everything humanity could achieve without artificial limitations. Karen demonstrated the Defender's capabilities against drone targets. The ship moved faster and hit harder than anything its size should manage. Military analysts from every species studied the footage and reached the same conclusion. Humanity had been handicapped for decades. Free from those restrictions, humans had become genuinely dangerous. The galaxy would need to reconsider everything it thought it knew about this young species. Daniel Brooks worked 20-hour days building what he called the Terran Coalition. This was not another council with hierarchies and privileges. This was a genuine alliance of equals where every member had the same rights regardless of age or power. The first members were minor species that the Council had marginalized. They joined eagerly because humanity offered them something they had never experienced, which was respect. While the Galactic Council tore itself apart, humanity built something new from the ground up. The transformation happened faster than anyone expected because humans were on military assistance for a colony under pirate attack. The debate lasted 4 hours. The Zethric wanted the colony to pay for protection. The Voth suggested the colony deserved to suffer for poor security planning. The Avian Srel argued about jurisdiction, while the crystalline Quarren questioned whether the attack was even happening. In the end, they voted to establish a committee to investigate whether intervention was warranted. Patricia left the chamber and transmitted her resignation to Chairwoman Silthera. She had wasted enough time watching this farce. The Council was beyond saving, and she had better things to do. She caught the next transport to Earth where she would join Daniel's coalition staff. Behind her, Apex Prime continued its slow collapse while the galaxy moved forward without it. Dr. Blake received a message from the Council Medical Director thanking her for the Viridian Syndrome cure. He asked if she would consider returning to help with other research projects. Sophie read the message and felt a moment of temptation. Then she remembered the bureaucracy and politics that had made her old job frustrating. She politely declined and suggested the director hire some of the alien researchers working at her institute who were brilliant scientists, freed from council restrictions. Nicole Hayes finalized a massive trade agreement linking the Terran Coalition with 15 independent commercial networks. The deal created an economic zone that rivaled the council's in size and exceeded it in efficiency. Goods flowed freely between member territories with minimal tariffs or regulations. Small merchants thrived. Consumers got better prices. Everyone benefited except council megacorporations that had relied on monopoly privileges. Admiral West received intelligence reports indicating the Kryn were planning another major offensive. This time they would target Terran Coalition members, hoping to exploit the new alliance's inexperience. Karen studied the data and smiled grimly. Let them try. The Coalition Military Command was already coordinating joint exercises between human and alien forces. They would show the Kryn what unified defense looked like. Daniel stood on Friendship 1's observation deck, watching ships arrive from across the galaxy. Some came to join the Coalition. Others came to trade or negotiate. All of them came because humanity offered something the Council never had, which was hope. Hope that things could be better. Hope that smaller species mattered. Hope that the future would be fairer than the past. He thought about that day 1 year ago when he walked out of the council chambers with his career and humanity's future hanging in the balance. The gamble had paid off beyond his wildest expectations. Humanity had not just survived outside the council. They had thrived. More importantly, they had proven that the old system was not inevitable. Change was possible. Progress was achievable. The galaxy could be better if enough people demanded it. 1 year after humanity walked out of the council chambers, everything had changed. The Galactic Council that had ruled for 12,000 years was dying. 8 council worlds had fallen to the Kryn invasion. 3 major species were fighting each other in open warfare over territory and resources. The economy had collapsed by 40%. The Viridian Syndrome had killed billions before Dr. Sophie Blake's cure finally stopped it. Refugees numbered in the hundreds of millions. The great civilization that had seemed eternal was crumbling into dust. Chairwoman Silthara stood in her private chambers and looked at reports that made her want to weep. She had ruled the council for 30 years with confidence that the old ways would always endure. Now she faced the reality that her pride and rigidity had destroyed everything. The council was broken beyond repair, and she knew exactly when the breaking had begun. It began the day she refused to help New Harmony. It began when she treated humanity like children instead of partners. She made a decision that would have been unthinkable a year ago. She authorized an envoy to Earth with instructions to beg, not negotiate or discuss, but actually beg. The council needed humanity more than it needed pride. Ambassador Krathix, the Zethric diplomat, received the assignment with humiliation burning in his chest. He had mocked humans during that final session. He had suggested they provoked their own problems. Now he would crawl to them and ask for mercy. The ship carrying Krathix arrived at Earth and requested permission to land. Admiral Kyle Jensen watched the approach on his monitors and felt grim satisfaction. He had known this moment would come eventually. The only question had been how long the Council's arrogance would last before reality forced them to face facts. He granted landing permission and informed President Claire Harrison that her guest had arrived. Krathix walked into the White House meeting room where Claire waited with her cabinet. Defense Minister Peter Cole sat to her right. Admiral Jensen stood by the wall. Ambassador Daniel Brooks occupied a chair near the window. Sophie Blake attended via video link from her laboratory. Every face showed the same expression, which was polite interest covering deep distrust. Krathix did not blame them. He delivered the Council's formal apology, which had been written and rewritten a dozen times. He acknowledged that the Council had failed humanity repeatedly. He admitted that denying aid to New Harmony was wrong. He confessed that the Council had taken human contributions for granted, while refusing basic respect. He said everything the Council should have said a year ago. Then he presented their offer. The Council would grant humanity full voting rights with no restrictions. They would give humans a permanent seat on the Security Directorate, with veto power over military operations. They would recognize complete human autonomy over all internal affairs. They would pay reparations for seized assets. They would do anything necessary if humanity would only come back and save them from the chaos that was consuming the galaxy. The cabinet members looked at each other. Peter Cole saw vindication. Kyle Jensen saw an opportunity to extract maximum concessions. Sophie Blake saw species dying from problems she could solve if politics allowed. Daniel Brooks saw the same flawed system that had driven them away. Claire Harrison saw all of this and more. She called a recess and convened her advisors in private. Kyle argued for leveraging this moment to gain every possible advantage. The council was desperate, which meant humanity could demand anything. Peter wanted guarantees written into law that no species would ever face the discrimination humanity had endured. Sophie advocated for reforming the council's entire structure, because just adding humans to a broken system would not fix the fundamental problems. Daniel suggested something that made everyone stop and listen. He proposed that humanity refuse to rejoin the council. Instead, they should offer to dissolve the council entirely and create something new. The Galactic Union, he called it. A democratic body where every species had equal representation and votes were weighted by contribution, rather than age or military power. Where laws applied fairly to everyone and smaller species had the same voice as elder races. Where cooperation was rewarded and isolation was discouraged. A complete reformation of galactic government built on human principles. The cabinet debated for 6 hours. Claire listened to every argument and weighed every option. Finally, she made her choice. She would present Daniel's proposal to both the Council and the Terran Coalition simultaneously. If the galaxy wanted humanity's help, then the galaxy would accept humanity's terms. Those terms were nothing less than complete transformation. The broadcast reached every inhabited world. President Harrison appeared on screens across the galaxy with Daniel Brooks standing beside her. She spoke clearly about what humanity had learned over the past year. The old council system was broken because it valued age over merit and power over justice. It created hierarchies that bred resentment and corruption. It could not survive because it did not deserve to survive. Humanity would not rejoin the Galactic Council because the Galactic Council would cease to exist. In its place would rise the Galactic Union, built on principles of equality and cooperation. Every species would have representatives. Every voice would be heard. Decisions would be made by consensus whenever possible and by fair voting when necessary. The old privileges and special rights would end. The new era would begin. The proposal ignited fierce debate across the galaxy. Progressive species like the Thalron supported it immediately. Chief Engineer Greg Palmer had saved their colonies and earned their eternal gratitude. They trusted humans to build something better. Minor species that had joined the Terran Coalition celebrated, because they would finally have real power. But the elder species reacted with fury and fear. The Voth rejected the proposal outright. Quethix declared that humans were trying to steal galactic leadership through manipulation. The Zethrak military faction agreed and threatened war if humanity continued this arrogance. The Crystalline Quarren warned that dissolving the council would create chaos worse than the current crisis. Conservative forces rallied together to preserve the old system that had served them so well for millennia, but reality could not be denied or debated away. The council was dying whether the elder species admitted it or not. More council worlds fell to the Kryn every week. The refugee crisis worsened daily. Species continued leaving to join the Terran Coalition. Because the coalition offered stability the council could not provide. The choice became clear. Accept humanity's proposal or watch everything burn. The transformation happened slowly over 6 months. It began with the progressive species formally withdrawing from the council and joining the Galactic Union. The Thalron led the way, followed by a dozen others. Each defection weakened the council further. Trade shifted to routes controlled by the Terran Coalition. Military coordination happened through human command structures. The council chambers on Apex Prime stood increasingly empty as delegates stopped attending sessions that accomplished nothing. Silthara watched her authority evaporate like water in vacuum. Species that had obeyed the council for thousands of years now ignored her directives. Her orders went unanswered. Her threats rang hollow. She finally accepted what she should have understood a year ago. The council's power had always been built on cooperation and consent. Without those foundations, authority meant nothing. She called one final session with every remaining delegate. The chamber that had once held representatives from 47 species now hosted barely 20. Silthara looked at the empty seats and felt the weight of her failures. She proposed that the remaining council members vote to dissolve the Galactic Council and transfer all authority to the Galactic Union. The vote passed unanimously because everyone understood there was no alternative. The inaugural ceremony of the Galactic Union took place on Unity Station, which had been constructed jointly by humans and 20 other species over 4 months. The station orbited a neutral star halfway between Earth and the former Council capital. Its design incorporated architectural elements from 30 different cultures. No single species dominated the structure. Everyone contributed. Everyone belonged. Captain Ryan Foster commanded the honor guard at the ceremony. His crew stood in formation wearing dress uniforms representing the Earth Defense Force. Beside them stood honor guards from the Thalron and Srel and dozens of other species. Sophie Blake attended as director of the Union Medical Corps. Governor Andrew Carter represented colonial affairs. Admiral Karen West chaired military command with Thalron Admiral Thosick in the new Union Defense Fleet. Ambassador Daniel Brooks took the oath of office as the Galactic Union's first Secretary General. Beside him stood his deputy Silthara, who had accepted the position with genuine humility. She had learned hard lessons over the past year. She understood now that leadership meant service, not domination. She would spend the rest of her life trying to build what she had helped destroy. Daniel's first act was to coordinate the Union's response to the Kryn invasion. No more arguing about whose colonies deserved protection. No more delays while species debated jurisdiction. The full military power of 30 species moved as one force. Karen West and Thosick led the fleet personally. They jumped into Kryn territory and hit them so hard the invaders never recovered. The war ended in 3 months. The Kryn sued for peace and accepted terms that guaranteed they would never threaten anyone again. Conquered worlds were liberated. Refugees began returning home. The Union's member species worked together to rebuild what had been destroyed. Progress happened at a pace the old council could never have managed, because cooperation moved faster than bureaucracy. Trade flourished under the new system. Captain Nicole Hayes expanded her network to include Union routes and watched profits soar. Minor species that had been exploited for generations now competed on equal footing with ancient races. Innovation accelerated as ideas flowed freely between cultures. The economy recovered and then exceeded what it had been under the Council. Greg Palmer trained a new generation of engineers from 20 species. They learned human techniques alongside traditional methods and created hybrid solutions better than either alone. Sophie Blake's medical research team grew to include hundreds of scientists from every member species. Together, they made breakthroughs that saved lives and improved health across the galaxy. Daniel stood in his office on Unity Station and watched ships from 100 species arriving and departing. They came to trade and negotiate and cooperate. They came because the Union offered something the Council never had, which was genuine partnership. Silthara joined him at the window and spoke quietly about how blind she had been. She admitted that the Council had grown complacent and corrupt over millennia. They had forgotten that civilization required constant work and renewal. They had believed their age granted them wisdom when really it had only granted them arrogance. Humanity taught the galaxy a lesson it desperately needed. True strength came not from domination but from mutual respect. True power came not from hierarchy but from genuine partnership. Daniel accepted her words without gloating. He had not walked out of that council chamber to prove humans were superior. He had walked out because his people deserved dignity, and so did everyone else. The Union embodied that principle. Every species mattered. Every voice deserved to be heard. Every member contributed according to their abilities and received according to their needs. The day humanity left the Galactic Council, everything had collapsed. But from those ruins, something better emerged. The Union would face challenges and problems because no system was perfect, but it would face them together with every species working as partners rather than subjects. That was humanity's greatest contribution to the galaxy. Not their technology or military might, but their unwavering belief that every sentient being deserved respect, and every civilization deserved a chance to thrive. The future stretched ahead, uncertain but hopeful. The old order had fallen and the new order was still finding its shape. But across the galaxy, species that had once been enemies were learning to be friends. Cultures that had never met were sharing knowledge. People who had suffered under the Council's indifference were building better lives. The transformation was not complete and never would be, but it had begun and nothing would stop it now.